I'm going to talk about incident response. However, this isn't going to be a technical input, and you'll find out why, because we have partners within what we call a cyber incident response cadre who deal with the absolute tech, the ones and zeros, and they're the ones that respond to the incidents on our behalf. But we're a partnership, and we're also part of the Cyber Scotland partnership. So I will explain more as I go through this. I just wanted to discuss this one point in relation to when I first saw a cyber incident. It was easy for me when I was in the cyber protect arena, when I was a cyber protect officer. We were putting things together like leaflets and pamphlets, the kind of things that you would hand out here. Where we're working, as I say, with the regional crime offices, and we were putting tweets out, and we were dealing with this, I kind of called it soft cyber, where we're just trying to make businesses more resilient. And working in that area, we weren't really dealing with complainers. And one day, one of the guys from the cyber operations team was asking where I was going, and I said I was going to Stirling or around there. And I had cause to go to a business and take some statements on his behalf, and it was the first time I'd actually seen the devastation that a cyber incident can have. It was all very well just making up flyers and putting together things saying enable two-factor authentication, make sure you've got good passwords, etc. But this was the devastation. I had to note a statement from a guy whose company provided bins. They provided refuse collection, they provided recycling collections, they provided glass, etc. and stuff like this. And when I went into this business to go and speak to the guy, I was given his mobile number because he had no systems working in his office. He had no payroll to pay his staff. He had no bins that were going out doing any of the deliveries or the pickups, so he had no recycling facilities either. This was absolute devastation, and it was at that point where I thought, hold on a second, there's a lot more to this than leaflets. And I know our operations team would have been dealing with these incidents all the time, or dealing with incidents like this a lot of the time. But for me, it was a real eye-opener to see someone who couldn't do anything, who couldn't communicate within their business, who couldn't deliver bin services or recycling services within the central belt of Scotland. And then there was the complaints coming in, and the complaints couldn't come in because the people couldn't get through on the phone. So as I say, that was my first real taste of sort of, hold on, this is great. And to see someone who was so down, devastated, not knowing what to do and nowhere to turn. And I'm going to touch on staff later on. So I staff the incident response helpline. I've got the phone in my pocket, diverted at the minute. It won't connect though, because thankfully I've got another member of staff who's covering that. And this is a Scottish Government-led product and project, along with the SBRC and along with the Cyber Scotland partnership. And this is a number that can be called from anyone in Scotland when they have a cyber incident. And again, later on, I'm going to touch on just the sort of cyber incidents that we deal with. So, funded by the Scottish Government, it was the first UK incident response line put together and staffed 5 days a week, 9 till 5. So it's not out of hours. But it is, as I say, 5 days a week. And we sit within, so there's key elements of incident response that some of you probably will know or might know. We do not take on the identification, containment, eradication, etc. We do touch on post-incident, which again I'll explain afterwards. But the services that we provide in relation to incident response are twofold. We provide a phone number that people can call and we triage. And then we also work with Cyber Scotland Partnership to put together incident response plans. So an incident response, or at incident response, we manage the calls to the incident response line. We triage them. We mark them up accordingly. We manage our cadre that I mentioned earlier on, our group of experts, private sector companies who are trained to a certain level, that are trusted partners essentially. And also, I manage the Cyber Scotland Partnership content on its website, which has a full list of details for putting together an incident response plan. So going through that, if someone was to call the incident response line, we would get a background to the call, we would record the incident, and we would provide suggestions. And suggestions only, we're not giving advice here. We leave the advice and getting into the nitty-gritty of a cyber incident to our cyber incident response cadre. But we do follow NCSC and cyber aware guidance. We do also advise to contact Police Scotland, although I think the numbers are worrying in relation to the amount of cyber incidents that actually get reported to the police. And speaking to one of our cyber incident response cadres who services larger companies, he said that he'd dealt with 10 serious cyber incidents in the last 7 days of me speaking to him, and not one of them, or at not any point, was there ever a consideration to report to the police. So there is a huge underreporting. We actually, putting my old police hat on, we knew there was an underreporting to go on, but to speak to someone and hear that not one of the incidents they dealt with that week had been reported was worrying. So it's very, very difficult to kind of get an angle on just what is coming in. Although obviously we've got our own stats at the SBRC. We also advise reporting to the ICO if it's relevant, if there's personally identifiable information that's been leaked or potentially leaked. And then also we support callers through this incident. I've mentioned there we refer to our IR cadre. Now when we refer to our IR cadre, we're not picking or choosing anyone. If one of you had a cyber incident, we would give you a list of incident responders who would be able to support your business. As I say, some of the incident responders on our cadre, they will stipulate that they have a 40 hours minimum, or they'd want to deal with companies that have got 1,000 endpoints or 1,000 staff minimum. So we would obviously not give them on to a small business who had a business email compromise incident of £15,000. We're not going to pass on an incident response company who will charge £15,000 for the first day's work, essentially. I'm also responsible for managing this IR cadre that I've told you about. So our IR cadre, as I say, range from someone who will support an SME, probably not micro businesses, but we do have other services within the SBRC. I make sure that their information's up to date, that I understand what it is, the services that they provide, onboard new ones, and I also understand their full emergency response process. Now that's for me is just understanding what's the number to call, what are the expectations for one of our callers, and also understanding that there's absolute panic when people call an incident response. So just understanding the process, and as I said, understanding who would support an SME and who wouldn't support an SME. Lastly, and I'm going to go through this a wee bit more, is the Cyber Incident Response Pack. Now, if you go to the Cyber Scotland Partnership website, we've got a stall in the corner there. There is a full pack in Word document format where a business can set up and work through. There's the toolkit response step, but there's also things like templates for emergency contacts, communication guides, but as I say, I'll cover that a wee bit more. So the story that I told you at the start in relation to the absolute devastation that had happened to a business, and seeing the human side of it, and seeing someone who is absolutely blown away with how their business is going down the drain and the sheer panic that they had on them. Not all the calls to the SBRC cyber incident line are all like that. So we have all members of the public that phone, and we have members of micro businesses, SMEs, up to bigger businesses as well. So we will not, there's no one getting turned away. If it's, in fact, I got driving through here on the M8 and I had to stop and take a call from someone who'd just had a phone call to say that their Virgin was getting cut off and it was a scam call. So we'll take phone calls from individuals. I had a phone call from a small charity the other day there with 3 members of staff. So we're supporting businesses of all sizes, and I think different to what an incident response company would charge. We also have services and staff that can support that. So as I said, we don't give too much information and guidance, but we actually have qualified ethical hackers who work in partnership with Abertay University who are in our office who can supply that. We're not going to step on the toes of our incident response cadre who are out there to get paid services, but we're also aware that there are smaller incidents where sometimes just a bit of help and a chat with someone. My old boss used to call it a cyber cuddle with them, and just talk them through the incident. So sometimes that's all that people need. They need reassured that putting the phone down on this person from Virgin was the right thing to do, and that keeping the number for our IR line and also keeping the number for Virgin Media, the correct number, is all they need to do. So sometimes the most simplest of information, the most simplest of advice is all we need to give, but it will put someone's mind at rest. That's not me, is it? That wasn't me, was it? No. Just touching on the incident response toolkit For micro businesses and for SMEs, this will be a step too far in relation to some of the stuff that's required, HR communications, legal services, identifying incident types. But for bigger businesses, it is the case that they maybe need to put forward a communication strategy if there's an incident. They also need to understand who to put in front of the camera or who to put in front of the radio if they're going to be speaking to the public. In fact, they probably won't be speaking to the public, they'll probably be speaking to their customers who are asking what's happened to their data. I've highlighted the testing there because there is no point in having an incident response plan in place unless it has been tested, or at least part of it's been tested. So that's a really, really important part of the cyber partnership toolkit. Also, we would promote just getting an understanding of what the risks are out there in relation to your business type, essentially. Now, they've obviously got the general information from cyber, I mentioned earlier on, I can't remember the name, general information in relation to being safe online, but there are also business documents and business content that you can get from various sources, NCSC. We have a cyber alert that goes out once or twice a week through our threat portal, and there's also open source vendors as well. So understanding just what it is, what the problems are out there in business is another starting point for a business. Now, I mentioned about testing the IR process. Sorry. So the IR process is all very well on paper, but unless you've actually taken it through and you've tested what's going on, you've tested how resilient you are, you've tested understanding things like what people's roles are within your company, at what point does escalation take place, who can do what. So there's a product within the SBRC called Exercise in a Box. Now, this is an NCSC product, and what it does is it allows businesses to take part in a workshop whereby you can actually test the resilience of your business. You can test the processes you've got in place. This is done in a safe environment carried out by some of our ethical hackers and one of our head of professional services. You can go through it. Now, we've got scenarios already in place in relation to passwords, phishing, ransomware incidents and stuff like that. But what this does is this allows you to be critical of yourself. No one is marking your exercise in a box outcomes. It's for you as a business to look and say, hold on a second, do we have something in place for supply chain, or what is our password policy? In fact, do we have a password policy? Do we have two-factor authentication set up on our email because we've just moved to Office 365? So it allows businesses to come along, take part in an exercise in a box, and then go away, be able to ask the questions of probably others within their business. Or maybe they could answer them there. There are more scenarios that we're adding to the Exercise in a Box product. Some of them there, again, just allowing businesses to take a look at themselves, go through the process, and then go away and just seeing where they need to become more resilient, or do they need to add things to their incident response plan. There's a scenario there, a ransomware scenario, a simple one in relation to an infected computer with 20,000 of Bitcoin. So that's a sort of scenario, and there will be inject. So these go on, and then there'll be an inject to say something else has happened. What are you going to do now? Something else has happened. What are you going to do now? Also, as part of an incident response plan, well, in fact, as just going to touch on the professional services. The SBRC also professional services, a commercial side of the SBRC, although we're a not-for-profit business, so we can put that back in to developing more products that's going to support businesses within Scotland. It might be the case that when you went along to the Exercise in a Box, you realised that you needed to do more training as staff. So there's training as staff, there's tabletop exercises. Maybe it was the case you wanted to do a phishing exercise or a phishing campaign on staff, obviously after you'd done some training. So the SBRC have these available. Also network testing and stuff like that. So as I say, off the back, as part of an incident response plan, it may be the case that you want to say, hold on a second, we want to get some tabletop exercising done. We want to get some phishing exercises done, just to see where we are in terms of our resilience. And that would sit as part of your incident response plan. Now, I touched on the staff members I'd spoken to at the business in the Central Belt. I was at an event the other day there, and David Calder from Adama was there, Adama Security, and he laboured this point, and for the right reasons. That was one business where I dealt with, where I walked away. One, I was so shocked at the devastation and the trouble it had caused with the business. I also dealt with 2 ransomware incidents about 6 months before I retired from the police. And on both occasions, we had spoken to the Chief Information Security Officer or Head of IT. There was also a lawyer there from the company, and we were speaking them through. They were talking us through the incident. They were our main points of contact for the next few days as the incident transpired. One of them had gone bad. One of them had been able to manage to pull the plug on their servers earlier on, and one had gone better. But in both cases, the staff members who were in the IT, who were the information security officers, appeared to have taken this extremely personally. It was almost like it was their system, their servers, their responsibility. And I came off a Teams meeting with one of the members of, well, in fact, with the 2 of them, and then I got in touch with a lawyer who had been sitting next to them, and we asked if they were okay, and they had echoed exactly the same concerns. So as part of an incident response plan, please also consider the staff and what their roles might be in it. And when it comes to burnout, who's going to take over? Or how are they going to get supported? Or how are they going to get supported long time? Because there's a lot more to it than just the data and the information that you're holding. Your staff are key to your running your business. And to have some major players in your IT department burn out isn't going to go well. I was, as I say, we were absolutely shocked to see how unwell both these guys looked after about 6 or 7 days of back and forward. And then having to deal with things like ICOs and then put reports in because they've only got 72 hours to do it. And as I say, the personal responsibility that they seem to feel for their systems was worrying. So yeah, David Call, as I say, from Adama, definitely was mentioning this. I was also lucky enough last week to be at a presentation where Kieran Martin, who was head of the NCSC, and also Chris Uliot from RBS was there. He's a CISO for the RBS. David from Adama and Kieran and Chris banged home. In fact, the 3 of them said a few times, get the basics right and have a plan. They must have repeated this between the 3 of them at different points throughout the day and when it's talking about different things. But don't go spending too much money. They were going on about, don't spend too much money on software. Buy software, on security software, buy software that's secure. If you're a small business, and in the SBRC support SMEs, if you're a small business and a startup, and there are vendors here, but some of these bigger events, there are other vendors whereby there's lots and lots of money. You could walk away from one of these events spending an awful lot of money. You know, it might be the case that Office 365 Business with a OneDrive with 2-factor authentication is more all that you need for the first 2 years of a startup. So getting the basics right and speaking to the right people is absolutely essential. And the second part that I fall into is have a plan. As I say, they mentioned this a lot. They'll have a plan in relation to your business continuity, in relation to your business going forward, but have a plan if there's a problem, if there's a cyber incident, and how do you respond, at what stage do you intervene, who takes responsibility, is there a communications plan? But getting the basics right and having a plan are 2 of the main messages that I would push today. Now, I've got nothing more to say at the minute. Has anyone got any questions in relation to this? Hi.
So particularly around the ransomware attacks. So I'm aware of a couple of kind of high-profile incidents where ultimately the company involved has ended up actually paying the ransom. So how do you handle these kind of situations where services are not being provided, the company is desperate to get the services up and running again, and they kind of want to pay the ransom just to make this go away? Like, what kind of advice and strategies do you employ at that stage?
I'm going to have to put my police hat on here and essentially, well, we give the same advice. We always advise never to pay it. You're just fueling organised crime, and it's only just going to get worse and worse. It may be the case you'll end up on a suckers list. It may be the case. In fact, one of the ransomware incidents I dealt with, it was a double encryption. So they'd actually gone to negotiate with one of the hackers that had done it and found out that it had been encrypted twice. So someone else had been in over the weekend. So it's not to say they're going to get content back. Some of the incidents dealt with, they will give you some of the content back. There's a bit of damage to some of it. So you might, if it's, I don't know, customer data, it's not all there. They keep a bit back and then they threaten you again in a few months' time and say, hey, listen, we kept a bit back. We would promote never ever fueling organised crime, but I absolutely get. And I think back to, say, an Edinburgh city centre photographer who had lost 20 years' worth of work. Every photo he'd ever taken had been encrypted, and then the backups had been encrypted. Now I get, in fact, I was involved in the negotiation with the people that had done it in the first instance. I get that they want to pay it. £10,000 for 20 years worth of work isn't a bad negotiation. So I know. But it's entirely up to the business. We would push, as I say, the fact they're fueling organised crime. We would try and dissuade someone to do it. But if someone said, "Listen, I'm ready to do a deal here," and bizarrely, criminals and organised criminals there's negotiation to be had. They will. This happened at probably the first 6 months of COVID, and it was bizarre how polite the negotiations went with someone who's lost 20 years worth of photography. But it was discussed. The guy said, "Listen, I've not been working. I've been in lockdown for such and such. There's no way I can pay half a Bitcoin. Can we call it 0.25 a Bitcoin?" And then negotiate. And it was like, I was surprised. Well, I would have been absolutely furious and unable to type, but this guy who just continued on a. Unfortunately, he was one of the guys who'd had a double encryption, so they'd been in twice. We were negotiating with the first ones, and then we sent a file off to them and said, well, just to make sure before we do send 0.25 Bitcoin to you, we just want to make sure that you can do this. And they came back and said, so that's not us. So, anyone else got any more questions at all? Hope that was useful. If anyone wants to speak to me after, or anyone from Cyber Scotland Partnership, we're in the top right-hand corner. Okay, thank you very much.